Hi, my name is Kristin. This is Kristin Kraves Books. March was an amazing reading month for me. I read more high quality books in this month than I have for a long time. And I think a large part of that is my TBR Cart challenge. This is my TBR Cart. The books down here are the ones I want to prioritize this year. A lot of them I have had on my TBR shelves for years. I did a whole tour of this cart, so I will leave that in the description down below in case you're curious. But I did pick up a couple books from that cart that I have had on my shelves for at least 3 to 5 years, and they're just those books that you knew were going to be favorites and you were saving for the perfect time. There's never a perfect time, so I finally decided to do it. I'm not going to let those books that I know I'm going to love just sit there because it doesn't make any sense, and I know I'm not the only person that does that, but this month was proof to me I need to do that more often. So I actually started the month with a 2022 release on audio, and that was Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. And this was an eye-opening experience for me. It opened me up to a new genre. I have been dipping my toes into horror, and there's a lot of horror I love. I really like the depths and layers that there are in horror, so some of my favorite books are horror, but I haven't read sci-fi horror, which is funny because I adore sci-fi, so this is a genre I really want to explore. So if you have any recommendations, please leave those down below. But Dead Silence is said to be like Titanic in space, and it definitely has that vibe because we're following a crew on a ship. I think it's a maintenance ship, and they come across a luxury spaceship, much like the Titanic, that disappeared many years ago. And they decide to board the ship, and you get a lot of their backgrounds, especially your main character. You really get a peek into her past and why she makes certain decisions, which I really loved. And then a lot starts to happen on this ship. I won't get into details, you have to experience it for yourself, but it's creepy. This is a horror. And we also get some set in the present where she has survived whatever happened on this ship, and she's talking to people and kind of telling her story and trying to remember what happened. So there are a lot of layers here. It's super creepy. I really had a fun time with that, which was a surprise for me, and I need to read more sci-fi horror, so I do recommend that one quite a bit. I then picked up one of the books on my TBR cart that I just knew I was going to love, and actually I said there wasn't a perfect time to read a book, but it was like now or never for this book because the TV adaptation just came out, and this is Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee. I haven't watched the adaptation yet because I do not have Apple TV. I'm gonna have to just do it and start, because there's so many good shows on Apple TV and adaptations, so I'm really gonna have to just do it. There's so many streaming services now, it's hard to keep up with. But I have watched the trailer for this so many times, so I just have to do it. But this actually inspired me to start annotating again, which is something I haven't done for a long time. So this just reignited a lot of love for a lot of things, and I think it really got my reading going this month, and I fell back in love with the reading in a way I've always loved reading. I'm a booktuber, I'm part of a book blog. I always have loved reading. I don't go into slumps very often, but this just really proved to me the power of reading and how immersed you can get, and how much I love multi-generational family sagas. This takes place it starts in Korea, then we're in China. Over the course of many decades, we've followed many generations of this family, but I love how everybody's connected to this one character. I just loved her, and she makes some decisions you don't completely understand, but she really tries her best, and she's in a terrible situation. And I loved all the descriptions of Korean food, and some of the later chapters I wasn't as invested in their stories, but I still really appreciated them, and I understood where the story was going, and I just loved this. I loved the writing. I was moved to tears multiple times. I think that Min-Jin Lee does a good job of balancing between heartache and hope. I know there are a lot of books out there that are just crushing and traumatic, and this has some of that in there, but there's some lightness to this as well, and the characters and the story just felt very authentic. So if you've been putting this one off, I highly recommend it. Don't let the size of it intimidate you, because that's what I did, but I flew through this. I would read this again. I cannot wait to watch the adaptation, and this is a new favorite. Like, this might be my top 10. I have to let that sit for a while, but I absolutely adored this. And as you can see here, my tabbing continued, but I did read So Many Beginnings by Bethany C. Morrow. I've talked about this series a lot because I'm so interested in it, and this is a Little Women remix, and this publisher has done a bunch of these remixes of classics. They turn them into YA stories. So I have another one, it's Clash of Steel, that's a Treasure Island remix. This is the second book in the series. So Many Beginnings, a Little Women remix. And what's so interesting about this one is it's set in the same time period as the original story. So during the American Civil War, but we're from a completely different perspective. But it's all the same characters who you love. Meg is a teacher in this, Joe is a journalist, Beth actually is a dressmaker, and then Amy is obviously, she's young in here, but she becomes a dancer, and it's just so beautiful. And it is set on the Free People's Colony of the island of Roanoke, and I didn't know much about that going in, and you learn quite a bit in here. And just from Joe's parts, there's some of her writing is included in here, and that's a lot of what I have tabbed. And I think those parts alone make this book worth reading, worth teaching in schools. I think that everybody can get something out of this book. I thought that this was really, really well done, and it stays true to the original text in the ways that I feel are important, but it becomes its own unique thing and diverges from the original text in a way that makes it feel fresh and has a different voice, adds some more depth. And I liked a lot of the changes that Bethany C. Morrow made to the story. So yeah, it's great. It's got all the sisterhood that you want from and love from the original, so I highly recommend this, not just for YA readers. I think everybody will get something from this one. It's been a minute since I read graphic novels, but I finally got around to the next 2 volumes in my favorite graphic novel series, and that is Descender. I just love this series. I think the first graphic novel series I ever read was Saga, and that made me fall in love with sci-fi graphic novels, so that's really where I tend to lean to when I am reading graphic novels. So if you have any sci-fi graphic novel recommendations, let me know, because I think I only have 2 left in this series. So the third one is called Singularities, and this is my favorite in the series so far. You get some amazing background stories into all of these characters. You understand them more. It's a very simple premise. We're just following this robot called Tim 21, and he is kind of like a robot made for children, and then there's an uprising and the robots are being killed, and Tim 21 kind of is running away. It's fun. It's actually, there's a lot of great commentary as well. I love the art, and I just loved this volume. This volume is by far my favorite, and yeah, so I highly recommend this series. This is by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Wynn, by the way. And then the fourth one is Orbital Mechanics, and I think I like this one quite a bit too. It just built on a lot of the reveals that we got in the third volume. So I read 2 last year, 2 this year. Maybe I'll read 2 more next year. I'm just not ready for this series to end, so I'm gonna savor them while I can. But I just love the art in here. So yeah, if you have sci-fi recommendations, let me know. So I am trying to read one nonfiction title every month. So this month I listened to In the Shadow of a Mountain by Sylvia Vasquez Lovato. And this is a difficult listen, but it's well worth it if you can handle it. So this is following obviously the author. This is a memoir, and she was sexually abused as a child, and she goes into detail of what that experience was like, and it's horrifying to read. And then she talks about how that experience led to complicated relationships with her family members. She eventually becomes an alcoholic, and some other devastating things happen in her life. It's just, she's one thing after another. It's very traumatic. But part of her experience, she starts a nonprofit, and her and other sexual abuse survivors decide to summit Mount Everest. And so we get, some chapters are about her past, some chapters are about this journey up Mount Everest, and then some of the stories from the other women that are there, and it's very moving in that way. It's very powerful. I loved a lot of her insights. And what's interesting about this book is actually it's going to be adapted, and Selena Gomez is going to star in it, so I think that'll be really interesting. And yeah, so there are lots of triggers in here. One of the better memoirs I read in a long time. Definitely listen to it on audio if you can, and yeah, just know going in that it's going to be a hard listen. After that book, I needed something a little lighter, and I am part of Olivia from Olivia Reads a Latte's Patreon, and in her Discord she has like a cozy mystery book club, and this month it was Granny's Got a Gun, and this is by Harper Lynn. Here's the cover. It's just cute. This is such a short audiobook. I think it's on Scribd, the entire series on Scribd, so if you need a cozy mystery series, this is a good one. I think it was under 3 hours, and I listened on 2.5 speed, so I flew through this. and it is following a retired CIA agent. She's a grandmother, and it's just a good time. So I had fun with that. I would recommend it if you're into that kind of thing and you need something to break up some intense reads. That's a good one. Next, I read a book you might have seen if you are on book Twitter, but this is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. You might recognize Travis Baldree's name because he's a pretty popular audiobook narrator, and this is his first work, and I loved it, and I listened to it on audio because he's fantastic. He's such a fantastic narrator. And okay, you have to look at this cover. Can you see it? This is the cutest cover I've ever seen, and what this cover promises, you get inside. It is adorable. We are following this orc barbarian who retires, doesn't want to have that life anymore, and decides to open a coffee shop in a town where nobody knows what coffee is. So you get that hilarity of people coming in and trying the coffee, not liking it, loving it, discussing it. It's really cute. It's really fun. There's a sapphic romance in here. It's so adorable. It's exactly what I needed in a fantasy. And even though it's a light, low stakes fantasy, I think it says on here, a novel of high fantasy and low stakes. That's the tagline. There are enough stakes to keep you reading. There's enough drama and there's enough mystery and something happening to keep you turning the pages. So don't worry about that. Things happen. It's still entertaining. You're gonna fall in love with these characters. It deserves all the hype. I think Shannon McGuire just tweeted about this, and I saw that the author showed like this spike in his sales, the McGuire effect. So I think that's so fun, and I'm so happy for him because this deserves all the hype. If you've been thinking about this, get your hands on it. And even just to have this beautiful cover on your shelf, I am in love with this cover, one of my favorite covers in such a long time. I then read the second book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series. I am co-hosting a read-along of this entire series, and this one is called The Tropic of Serpents. And I liked this one, not as much as the first, but I'm always somebody who likes the first book in a series because I like the setup. I like being introduced to the characters. This one was a lot more political than the first one, which I thought was interesting and I actually appreciated. It wasn't perfect. There's going to be a lot to discuss, I think, in our live discussion, and that discussion is on April 6th at 9 p.m. EST on Kristin's channel. Her channel is Kristin is Fully Booked. I will leave that all linked down below. So if you want to join us and hear more of my thoughts, all of our thoughts, join us that day. That would be fun. I would appreciate it. And you still have time to read this book because I actually really got through it quite quickly. I love the narration style. It's told as if it's a memoir, and that is so unique. I've never read anything quite like that, and I think that Marie Brennan does a great job with that. So I'm curious to see where the series is going from here. I've heard a lot of people say the third book is the best one, so I'm excited to get to that one next month. I then listened to another book that I saw on Twitter, and I never think of Twitter as being like one of my go-to recommendation sources, but it was in March for some reason. And this is actually a book that is free if you're an Audible Plus member, and it's only available on Audible, unfortunately, but it is A Walk in the Park by Rebecca Weatherspoon. This is adorable. It is a quick novella romance, and it is following these two people who have been promised the same dog at a shelter, and they go to pick up the dog, and it's just a kerfuffle. There's an ex-employee has made a mistake or has done something on purpose, and everybody's been promised all these dogs. So these two decide that instead of giving up the dog, they are going to co-parent the dog together. Even though they're strangers, they have a spark. There's so much great chemistry, and what's so fun about this is because the book is so short, you don't have a lot of the romance tropes that we are used to. There's no miscommunication here. They're very honest about their feelings, their concerns, all that stuff. There's no third act breakup. There's just not time for it. So it's just a really sweet, simple, realistic romance, and there's an adorable dog. I really love this. It was perfect for what I needed. I listened to a few of these Audible original romances, and this is by far my favorite. I then read Blood Scion by Deborah Fillet, and this was a arc that was sent to me by HCC Canada, and I loved it. This is one of the most brutal books I have read in a long time. Even though this is YA, don't let that fool you. The author does not hold back. This is intense. You don't get a minute to breathe. It's horrible in many ways. It's fantastically done, but it's so brutal. And I watched a lot of interviews with the author after I finished this, and she did a lot of research into child soldiers. So that's the kind of content to expect in here. Yeah, it's a lot, but it's so well done. So we're following a young girl who is a Scion. She has magic, but she has to keep that under wraps because her people are being killed and she's conscripted into this war, and it's just horrible. So we're following her training and her trying to keep this secret, forming relationships, having to do brutal things, make very difficult decisions. You might not always agree with the decisions that she makes, but you understand her, the position she's in. I can't imagine being in her position. You don't know what you're going to do in that moment. I thought it was so well handled. So the last bit of this really took a turn and ended on a bit of a cliffhanger. I keep checking every single day to see if it has been updated on Goodreads when the second one comes out. But yeah, this is not going to be for the faint of heart. I would definitely check the triggers. I will leave the triggers down below. There's just a lot going on in here, but I thought it was well handled. I really ended up loving this, and it's been a while since I read it and I can't get it out of my head. I still think about it. I then picked up the Ballerinas by Rachel Kalpak Dale, and I think that this book is suffering from the way it's marketed. It is being compared to Black Swan, and other than the fact that it's about ballet, there's nothing comparable to Black Swan. And I think that this is more for fans of center stage. If you're like me and you grew up in the center stage era, you're gonna love this. There is like a bit of a mystery throughout, but it's quite obvious what happened in the past. It's a typical thing that happens in these ballet kind of books. So if you're gonna read it, don't focus too much at that point because you'll be disappointed. This is really more of a character study. We're following 3 women when they were teenagers at this ballet academy, and then when they were in their 30s. And you know something happened in the past, and their friendship is a little bit awkward now. And I really thought it was well done. And of course, there's some twists and turns, whatever, but that's not what you need to focus on. It's really about our main character coming to the realization that so many people in the world think that they have ownership over women's bodies, especially in the world of ballet, and she's really fighting against that. I would say like majority of these tabs are about that character coming to terms or discovering that so many people think they have a say over women's bodies. So that's what stood out to me about this one. I really liked the insight into ballet. You really do get a lot of that because she becomes a choreographer in her 30s. So you get that as well, and her looking back at the younger students. So it's really interesting that way. As I said, if you're a center stage fan, give this a try. Just go into it knowing it is contemporary fiction. It is not a mystery. And don't get focused on that mystery part because it'll be a letdown for you. And that's such a small part of the story that you'll miss out on what I think is actually really good about this. Okay, I finally did it. I finally read Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys, and yeah, everything everybody says about this is true. It's heartbreaking. I will definitely be reading more from this author in the future. I have The Fountains of Silence on my shelves. I've heard Between Shades of Grey is fantastic. This is about a part of World War II I knew nothing about, which was refreshing, and I liked 3 of the 4 perspectives. Couldn't stand the one perspective, but I understood why it was included. It's interesting that this is a YA because I think only one of the characters is actually a teenager, but I think a lot of young adults should read this. And my only thing with it is that the chapters are so short that it was hard to stay connected to anybody for too long because you're jumping from all the perspectives so quickly. But the whole time I was reading it, I just knew it was going to be just devastating and what was coming, and it was a difficult read in that way, but I flew through this and I cried my eyes out at the ending. It was kind of beautiful in a bittersweet kind of way. So I really enjoyed this. I'm so happy that I finally got to it. So that is it. I'm actually in the middle of a couple books. I've started Daughter of the Moon Goddess, and I'm loving that so far. I'm halfway through an e-arc of You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty, which is one of the most interesting romances I've ever read. I'm excited to finish that and see what everybody thinks about that. I'm really enjoying it. I always love a quickie mezzy, but I don't think it's going to be what people expect, and I think that's what makes it interesting. But anyways, these are the 13 books that I read in March. I think Pachinko is probably my favorite, but there's some really good standouts in here. Like, I don't think any of the books I read were duds, which is amazing, and I'm looking forward to my April reading to tackle a few books on this cart. Here's Fountain of Silence here. You can't see it. Maybe I'll tackle that one in April. But yeah, this card has been working out well for me. So what was the best book that you read in April? Let me know. Let me know your thoughts on any of these books. And I will talk to you soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye for now.